welcome to Pressure Point. I'm your host, Valerie Dudoward. Our topic this program is quite indescribable. I guess I could only say Eden Robinson, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Our program is called Traplines, and it reflects the title of your recently released book as well, which has been gaining a lot of critical acclaim across the country. Were you surprised by the reaction?
Very surprised. I wasn't actually expecting as much attention as I've gotten, and it's quite a lovely surprise. It's a lot of fun too. I've done a lot of things with a book that I haven't ever done before. So
you were in Toronto
last week. Yeah, I did my first TV interview there, and I did a couple of radio and a couple of print, and got to meet my publishers, and got wined and dined a lot, and went to Niagara Falls. I went on Maid of the Mist. It was quite exciting.
The process of writing has been described by different writers as being everything from very lonely and very isolated to being very necessary and something that some writers need to do every day. Where in that do you fit as a writer?
Oh, obsessive compulsive. I write quite frequently, but I tend to write at night. Usually between the hours of 10 to o'clock, which is odd because I'm a morning person. But I also tend to write not so much every day. I find that really hard to do. I find that more of a grind than I like. And I wish it wasn't that way, because then I could pump stuff out instead of, because mine comes out in fits and spurts. Sometimes I'll find myself writing for 18 hours. Go to sleep, wake up, have breakfast, write for another 18 hours, and then write nothing for 3 weeks. So it's a tough one. I wish I didn't have that muse. I wish my muse had regular hours.
Well, maybe it wouldn't be a muse then.
Yeah.
I guess the thing that really struck me almost literally when I met you, which was just within the last few hours, is your sense of humor. I had read one of the stories in Traplines, and I really didn't expect to meet Eden Robinson, who just radiates this humor. And I'm having a hard time connecting that to the writing in some ways. Do you find that people respond to you in that way?
Very much so. I've had quite a few comments that, I think it also has to do with the picture on the back of the book, because it is quite dark, and it reveals a more morbid side of me that usually I don't show publicly. It is there, but it usually comes out late at night, which is probably why the stories are so dark. A lot of them were written late. It's also it's the stuff that I'm interested in my writing isn't the stuff that happens every day. Like I've only met one sociopath, and that was quite enough. But the cheerful, happy stuff that you think of every day, you don't need to deal with it, but the dark stuff that happens, there's no real way to express it. There's no real outlet for it. So writing has become that outlet. Writing has become a way of me dealing with things that I see but don't know how to explore in a creative, happy sort of way. Maybe not happy, but
the writing that is in Traplines is very it's very in the moment. Everything is so my senses were really involved in all ways with some of the scenes, especially the outdoor scenes. I grew up in a small town in northern BC and was familiar with some of the experiences, and it really, like in a sensory way, brought me back to that.
Yes. I used a lot of details from that, from the location, from what I saw, what I smelled, the temperature, the way it snowed. Other things I completely stole, like I heard stories and then I made them mine.
That's the fun of being a writer.
Yeah. But I was actually surprised at some people's reactions. I hadn't realized that some of the skinning scenes, like when the trapping, would be quite as some people found themselves revolted, and that it doesn't seem that shocking to me. It would be more like, gutting a fish or skinning a chicken. It's something that would happen more often than other people have had that experience.
I think a lot of people have never had any experience except for camping outside of an urban area, and so I think maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. But
because I can really relate to that, because I know that there are things that I share with my nieces and nephews, and I grew up, we spent a lot of time in a fishing boat and in my parents' villages, although I grew up in the town. And with my nieces and nephews, they are growing up in Vancouver. And so when they saw me doing something like throwing a live crab in boiling water, they were just horrified. Whereas to me, that is not, it was, I never really thought of it as, being a conscious thing or anything. So, but we won't tell people about that. And I think there are experiences like that in your book that can speak in that way to everybody.
Yeah. Well, I saw it on a TV show. It was one of the afternoon shows, and the chef came in to cook a crab, and the crab was wiggling around on the table, and he took a butcher knife and chopped it in half right in front of the host. And she went, "Ooh, I didn't know you'd be doing that." And he said, "Well, actually, it's more humane than than cooking it live." And she went, "Ooh." But yeah, that was quite shocking when it came right then, at that moment. But I'm kind of sick because I found it funny.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Kitimat, BC. My father's Haisla and my mother's Heiltsuk. Mom grew up in Bella Bella. She went to Port Alberni for a year. Port Alberni, I think that's it, to the residential school. And then she, quite young, she met Dad and moved up to Kitimat with him. Dad's lived in Kitimat all his life. He's the public works foreman up there. Yeah, he's retiring this year, so we're not sure, but we're going to throw him a big party. Not a surprise now, but...
I'll have time to prepare.
Yes.
Did you read a lot when you were growing up? Did you feel always a compulsion to read?
I felt a compulsion to read. Mom and Dad were both big readers. Mom read a lot of World War II stuff, a lot of romances, a lot of historical stuff, a lot of adventures, and Dad read a lot of nonfiction and popular mechanics. So it was a completely normal activity for me. It was something that everybody did. I really, really enjoyed it and was a voracious reader. From about the ages of 10 to 14, I just loved Stephen King. I also loved Edgar Allan Poe, and lately I can see where Joyce Carol Oates would fit in there. Yeah.
So, do you think of yourself as an author?
Not yet.
Not yet. How did the process of writing begin for you, begin to be a serious occupation for you?
I guess it would have started in grade 11. Until I was about, I don't know, how old are you in grade 10? I can't remember.
About 16.
About 16. Until I was about 15, I guess I wanted to be an astronaut. But around that time, they were switching over from actual rocket ships to space shuttles. And I was quite disappointed. I wanted to go up in a rocket ship. So I didn't want to.
Space shuttle doesn't have
Space
the
shuttle,
same,
you know, you're taking
yeah.
off, you're landing. It didn't quite have the same effect as parachutes and being Apollos. So I didn't actually want to be an astronaut anymore. So I was a bit lost for about a year, and it was reflected in like how my attendance, my marks. I just didn't know what to do with myself. But about grade 11, I'd always been writing, but it was like journal stuff and, you know, like the bad poetry. He left me.
Boo-hoo.
Boo. I still have some of it. It's quite awful. But around grade 11, I had two teachers who were highly influential in my choice of becoming a writer, Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Beadle. They gave me a lot of encouragement. They said how much they liked my writing. Sometimes they'd read my writing out in class and hold it up as an example of what was good. And I found that really motivating.
It's important to know what motivates you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I was in the library. I was in the library looking through the university catalogs. Not quite sure what I wanted to do, but knowing that it had to be something to do with writing. But I was thinking more English, like be an English major, when the UVic calendar fell off the shelf and opened to the creative writing page, the creative writing program.
You took that as a sign, obviously.
I took that as a sign.
University of Victoria.
UVic creative writing. So I went to UVic for 5 years. Met some very interesting people and had a good time. And some of the professors really liked my work, so I usually tended to take their classes. And then the first story I published was Traplines, the short story. And it was published in this little magazine called Prism International. It's the magazine that comes out of the UBC Creative Writing Department, and I was quite thrilled. I still have the acceptance letter. I still have the letter that says, the first letter that came that says, "We like your story, but it's too long. Can we edit it?" And then I have the acceptance letter, and I still have the edited copy that they gave me back. Then after that, a couple of months later, I won the Prism International Short Fiction Contest. And then I went over for the award ceremony to UBC. And I met the people who ran Prism, and they were very supportive and very encouraging. And I had a great time with them, so I decided, you know, UBC would be a great place to get my master's degree. So I went to UBC. Met a lot of good people again, and my eventual thesis advisor, Keith Millard, was actually very supportive, and he was understanding when I wanted to switch theses from this book I'd been writing called Monkey Beach to Traplines, to the novellas, because I wanted. Do you know what the Explorations grant is?
Yes.
Yes, was. I really wanted an Explorations grant. I wanted to work on the book. I wanted to spend a few months just writing. So I switched. At the time, they had this rule that your thesis couldn't be the same as your grant proposal. So I I quickly had to, I wanted to do Monkey Beach as my grant, so I had to come up with a different thesis, and I was 4 months to graduation. So I asked Keith, who was my thesis advisor at the time, if I could do it. He said, well, go for it. So I threw together the novellas, and we did a lot of work on contact sports, and we actually had a short story in there, but we took it out for the book. And then the day that I finished filling out that big long form that you have to type, my friend said, well, didn't you know the explorations have been canceled? I thought she was just telling me she was just being sick, but they had actually been canceled, and it took about 3 days of cheesecake before I recovered. But I decided to send off the novella collection to an agent, Denise Bukowski, and she liked them. And then a month later, we got an offer to have them published, and that's how it all came about.
Some of the reviews that I've read, and some of the reviewers of Traplines have said that their response to it has been very, very strongly focused on the youth, on the perspectives of youth in the books, and you are a young writer as well. So do you think that what you're saying is specific to First Nations youth? Is that a voice that you're speaking from, or is it youth in general?
It's more youth in general. The first 3 stories aren't actually from a First Nations perspective at all, but the last one is.
And you see, I think a lot of those reviewers made the assumption
that since I'm Native, then the stories must be about Native people, but the second story actually has a serial killer in it, and they're normally not Native. So yeah, that would be an obvious mistake. When I was first writing, when Traplines got published, for the book, we actually had to put Will's name right at the front, because people automatically assumed, since I was a woman, that Will must be a girl. So I had to make it very, very clear that no, he was a boy. So it's a common assumption that the writer is the character, but
surprise.
but I'm way too boring to be one of my characters.
I would find that really difficult to believe. I guess something that I wonder about as a reader is having an opportunity to meet you is so great, because I get to really ask the questions that I wonder about. And one of them is, was it ever a struggle for you to know whether you were writing from a character who was First Nations, or a perspective that was strongly First Nations?
Do you mean that, was it a struggle to write from a non-Native perspective, or?
No, to know which you were writing from, to know which voice you were writing from or not writing from. For example, some Aboriginal writers, their characters are all First Nations characters. The settings are all First Nations communities. They are, very much writing from perspectives of characters within that.
It wasn't difficult to write from a non-Native perspective at all, because so much of the media and literature and everything is non-Native. But what I was more fascinated with wasn't in the first 3 stories wasn't Native or non-Native. It was more extreme circumstances that seemed normal. I was more fascinated with people who were dealing with with people with no conscience. I was more fascinated by serial killers and psychopaths and sociopaths than I was with Native or non-Native. But in the last story, I found it hard because I set it in my own community. It's not anybody. I can't make that clear enough. She's not a real person. The people in there aren't real. They're people I made up in my own twisted imagination. But I found that hard because it was a balance between my artistic freedom and the privacy of a lot of other people. So I'm not sure if I'm as comfortable with that as I am with my psychopaths. It's easier to write. It's easier to write about the extreme horrors, the extreme people, and these bizarre circumstances than it is to write about a real place, but with fictional characters, because people mix them up so much, and there are so many misunderstandings that could happen that I was very, 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 very scared of doing it. Yeah, so it's an uneasy balance, and I don't know how well it worked, and I know when I go home, people will tell me.
They'll share that with you.
They'll share that with me, yeah.
I find that whole topic really interesting. I had gone to a workshop many years ago where a First Nations writer was delivering this workshop on writing, and she was talking about writing from a First Nations perspective and the responsibilities that she sees around them.
Oh yeah, you feel them. They're pretty heavy. They're hard to live up to too, and experience will teach me how to do it better. So I'm glad that I'm cutting my teeth on other things before I try that. I find people who do it really, really brave. In hindsight, maybe I should have set it on imaginary reserve, but it felt right at the time, and it's made me think a lot about the responsibilities that people have when they are writing about communities. It's not as easy as it seems. People are always saying write from what you know, but yeah, you have to. There's so much misrepresentation that you have to be careful about how you represent even your own culture. Yeah, and experience will teach me.
I guess everybody has to find their own point of balance within that, because the person who I was when I heard those words spoken by that author 15 years ago is not the person I am today, and my response to her words then is very different today.
Yeah.
I feel very differently about that whole can of worms than I did maybe 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I think from what I've seen as well, I think that there are so many in the one novella that I did read, that there are so many characters that can say so much to us, no matter who we are or what culture we come from. And I thought that was really telling, and that was interesting. And so I wondered what your perspective was around some of those issues, because there has been a lot of controversy in the Aboriginal community and outside of it, and in the creative community and in the political community about things like appropriation of voice, for example.
Very much so. Yeah. It got to a point where I said, if anyone asks me one more question about appropriation, I will scream. But it's a very complicated issue, and I'm quite scared of it. But at the same time, it's quite an interesting challenge to tell a story and have it be interesting enough that it doesn't, the ethnicity is secondary instead of primary, and the story is important, but sometimes they're like very intertwined. Some stories you can't tell without having a specific culture, and some stories you can, and that's what I've been following. And Monkey Beach, the next book, is definitely mired. It's definitely like, it's so entwined that you can't separate the culture from the story. But
are you working on that now?
Yes.
As we speak?
As we speak. Yeah, it's a tough one just for all those reasons. Yeah.
Is it a novel?
It's very much a novel. It has so many characters at the moment that I think some of them are gonna have to go, but it's really hard to let them go. I have a lot of fun writing. I really, really enjoy it. It's a blast. It gives me a voice. It gives me control over what I think is amusing and entertaining, and sometimes it's darker than other people's, but it's a blessing.
Eden, thank you very much for joining me on Pressure Point.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Eden Robinson has been my guest on Pressure Point. I'm your host, Valerie Dudoward.